Meat is the single most expensive thing in most grocery carts, and it's also the one category where a bad buy isn't just wasted money. It's a real health risk. Most food safety videos talk about how to cook meat safely. Almost none of them talk about where you bought it in the first place, which is where half the actual risk starts. I'm not here to scare you away from meat. It's one of the best protein sources there is, and buying it smart is completely doable once you know what to look for. This video is 10 places and situations where the odds of getting a bad, unsafe, or overpriced piece of meat go up significantly, based on straightforward food safety logic, not paranoia. We're counting down from 10 to number 1, and number 1 is the single biggest red flag there is when you're standing in front of a meat case, one that applies everywhere, every time, no exceptions. Quick ground rule before we start. This isn't about avoiding entire types of stores. Every category on this list is really about a specific condition or red flag, and any of them can show up almost anywhere if the wrong corner gets cut. Learn the pattern, not just the place. Let's get into it. The occasional hot dog or pre-made sandwich from a gas station cooler isn't going to hurt you. Those are usually turned over fast and held at controlled temperatures. The problem is raw meat specifically sitting in those same coolers, because gas stations are built and staffed around fuel and snacks, not around the kind of careful temperature monitoring a butcher case needs. These coolers get opened constantly by customers grabbing drinks, which means the temperature swings more than a dedicated meat case ever would, and raw meat is exactly the product least forgiving of temperature swings. Bacteria that cause real illness grow fastest in that swinging zone between refrigerator cold and room temperature. There's also a turnover problem. A gas station doesn't sell raw meat anywhere near as fast as a grocery store does. So what's sitting in that cooler may have been there considerably longer than the sell-by date implies, especially if nobody's specifically checking and rotating it the way a grocery butcher department does daily. If you're in a genuine pinch and it's the only option, cooked and sealed items are the safer bet over raw meat every time. Raw meat is the one category worth waiting on until you're somewhere built specifically to handle it. There's a staffing reason behind all of this too, worth understanding rather than just a symptom. A gas station's core job is fuel and quick snacks, so the staff generally aren't trained on meat handling the way a grocery butcher department staff specifically are, and nobody's job description includes checking a meat case temperature log every few hours. It's not a knock on the employees, it's just not what the role was built around. An open-air stand selling fresh produce is one thing. Most of that doesn't need refrigeration at all. But an outdoor stand selling meat with no visible cooler, no ice, nothing keeping it below the danger zone temperature is a genuinely different risk category, no matter how fresh or local it's advertised as. The math here is simple, and it's the same math behind every food safety guideline. Raw meat left between about 40 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit is in the zone where bacteria doubles roughly every 20 minutes. An hour in the sun at a stand with no cooling isn't a minor lapse. It's enough time for a genuinely unsafe level of bacterial growth. This doesn't mean avoid farmers markets. Plenty of vendors run proper coolers, ice packing, and even mobile refrigeration, and that's a completely different, often excellent source for meat with real traceability. The test isn't, is it a market? It's, can I see, right now, exactly what's keeping this cold? If you can't see active cooling, a cooler with visible ice, a working refrigerated case, anything, treat that stands meat the same way you treat meat found sitting out on a kitchen counter for a few hours. Not worth the risk, however good the story behind it sounds. A quick, genuinely useful habit at any outdoor market. Look for a posted permit or health inspection sticker, which legitimate vendors selling meat are almost always required to display. It's not a guarantee of anything by itself, but a vendor who's gone through that process has also almost certainly gone through the cold storage requirements that come with it. The permit and the proper cooler tend to travel together. Clearance meat itself isn't automatically bad. Stores mark it down specifically because it's still within safe limits, and they want it sold before that changes. And buying it same day or freezing it immediately is one of the smartest ways to save money on protein. The risk shows up specifically when the discount sticker is stacked with a sell-by date that's today or already passed, especially if you're not planning to cook or freeze it within hours. That combination means you're buying meat at the very edge of its safe window, with essentially zero buffer for anything going wrong between the store and your kitchen. The smart version of this deal: clearance meat with at least a day or two left, bought cold, driven straight home, and either cooked that day or frozen immediately. That's a genuine bargain with real safety margin. Clearance meat dated for today, sitting in a warm car for an hour on the way home, is a different bet entirely. One habit that makes clearance meat reliably safe: bring a small cooler bag on grocery trips specifically for meat, so the cold chain never actually breaks between the store's case and your own fridge or freezer, regardless of how long the rest of the shopping trip takes. The order you shop in also matters more than people realize. Grabbing meat last, right before checkout, instead of at the start of a long shopping trip, keeps it cold and in your cart for the shortest possible time before it's back in a fridge, a free habit that stacks on top of the discount instead of undoing it. A hot bar or buffet tray of meat looks safe because it's visibly hot, but heat lamps and warming trays don't guarantee the meat is actually above the safe holding temperature all the way through, especially near the edges of a tray or during a slow stretch when nobody's refilling it. The real risk factor is time, not temperature alone. Food safety guidelines generally treat hot-held food as needing replacement every couple of hours, and a lot of buffet trays quietly exceed that during slow periods, especially late in a shift when a fresh batch hasn't gone out yet. The practical fix costs nothing. Go early in a meal period when trays have just been refreshed, or ask when the tray was last restocked. Most staff will tell you honestly, and it's a completely normal question to ask, not an awkward one. If a tray looks dried out, has a skin formed on the surface, or the level has clearly been sitting low for a while, that's usually a visible sign it's been under the lamp longer than it should have. A good rule of thumb, even without asking anyone. Cold buffet items, deli meats, cold cuts, chilled prepared meat salads, actually carry less of this specific risk than the hot side, since a properly running cold case holds a stable, safe temperature far more reliably than a heat lamp does. If a buffet offers both, the cold side is generally the safer default when you're not sure how fresh the hot tray actually is. This one's less about where you're shopping and more about what specifically to check before it goes in your cart, because it can happen at literally any store, including the best one in town. A torn wrapper, a broken vacuum seal, or a package leaking more than a normal small amount of natural juice. A properly sealed vacuum package is airtight for a reason. The moment that seal breaks, air and bacteria get access. The packaging was specifically designed to keep out, and the safe shelf life assumption printed on the label no longer applies, even if the sell-by date is still days away. The check takes 5 seconds, and it's worth doing every single time. Look for a properly puffed, sealed vacuum pack or a tray with intact plastic wrap. No visible tears, and juice that's just a normal small pool, not excessive pooling or a package that's clearly lost its seal. If you do spot a damaged package still on the shelf, it's genuinely worth flagging to an employee rather than just skipping it. Most stores want to know and will pull it, which protects the next customer who might not check as carefully. At checkout, a related habit costs nothing and helps regardless of where the meat came from. Bagging raw meat separately from produce and ready-to-eat food, ideally in its own bag. It's less about the store's handling and more about not letting a slightly weeping package cross-contaminate anything else in the cart on the ride home. Buying meat online has gotten genuinely good. Reputable services ship with dry ice or gel packs and insulated boxes specifically engineered to keep meat safely cold for the entire transit time, and that's a legitimate, often excellent way to buy. The risk is specifically the informal version. A seller with no visible shipping and handling process, no stated cold chain method, shipping meat in a way that leaves it sitting on a porch in regular packaging for hours in unknown temperatures before you even know it arrived. The real question before buying meat online from anywhere unfamiliar: what specifically keeps it cold in transit, and how long is it actually in transit? A legitimate seller can answer that in one sentence: dry ice, gel packs, insulated box, guaranteed delivery window. If nobody can answer that clearly, that's the actual red flag, not the fact that it's online at all. And if a package does arrive and it's not still cold to the touch, or any ice packs inside have fully melted and warmed, that's the moment to not use it. Regardless of how good the seller's reputation is, a broken cold chain is a broken cold chain. Timing the order matters as much as the seller's process does. Scheduling delivery for a day someone's actually home, rather than letting a cold box sit on a porch in the sun for an extra 6 or 8 hours after the truck's already come and gone, closes most of the remaining risk, even with a genuinely well-packed shipment. A chest freezer that's overstuffed, disorganized, or has packages buried deep under others isn't just inconvenient to dig through. It's a sign that stock isn't being rotated properly, which means what's at the very bottom may have been sitting there since long before the newer stock on top arrived. Freezer burn is the visible tell here. Grayish-brown, dried-out patches on the surface of frozen meat, caused by air exposure inside imperfect packaging over an extended time. It's not dangerous the way spoiled fresh meat is, but it's a clear sign of age and neglect, and the texture and taste genuinely suffer for it. A well-run freezer section rotates new stock to the back and pulls older stock forward. The same first-in, first-out principle we've covered for a home pantry. So, a freezer case that's clearly not organized that way is a decent proxy for a store that isn't managing its meat inventory carefully in general. The fix is simple. Dig a little, check a few packages for freezer burn and ice crystal buildup inside the wrap. And if the whole bin looks like it hasn't been touched or restocked properly, that's worth noticing even if the specific package you grab looks fine. Worth knowing the difference between two things that look similar. A light dusting of ice crystals inside a properly sealed bag is completely normal and just means the freezer's doing its job, while thick, chunky ice buildup usually means the package has gone through a partial thaw and refreeze cycle at some point, a much bigger quality and safety concern than ordinary freezer burn. A real butcher counter with a knowledgeable person cutting to order is often the single best place to buy meat. Better cuts, more control, real answers about sourcing. But it's also the one place where you can actually watch the process, which means it's worth watching. The specific red flag. The same cutting board or knife used for chicken, then beef, then fish, without a visible wipe down or board swap in between. Raw poultry in particular carries a meaningfully higher risk of certain bacteria than red meat, which is exactly why kitchens are trained to separate them completely, not just rinse and continue. A well-run counter will visibly rotate boards, clean between different meat types, and staff will wash hands or change gloves between handling different products. It's genuinely easy to watch for in the 30 seconds you're standing at the counter waiting. If you see it done right, that's actually a great sign to keep buying there. This is one of the few items on this list that's as much a reason to trust a place as it is a reason to avoid one, depending purely on what you see them actually do. Gloves specifically are worth watching for, since they're an easy thing to get wrong without realizing it. A glove touching raw chicken and then raw beef without being changed in between is functionally the same cross-contamination risk as an unwashed hand, since gloves protect the food from the person, not different foods from each other. This is the one genuinely deceptive practice worth knowing about by name. Repackaging, where meat nearing its original sell-by date gets rewrapped in fresh packaging with a new, later date. Technically against regulations in most places, but it happens, and it's hard to catch unless you know the signs. The tell is usually a mismatch. Packaging that looks brand new and crisp, paired with meat inside that looks slightly duller, grayer, or has more liquid pooled in the tray than a truly fresh cut would. Fresh meat and fresh packaging usually look proportionally fresh together. A mismatch between the two is worth a second look. Smell is the most reliable final check, and it works regardless of what the label says. Fresh raw meat has almost no smell or a very mild one. Any sour, ammonia-like, or distinctly off smell means it's past safe regardless of the date printed on the front. Full stop, no exceptions. This is also the strongest argument for buying from a counter where you can ask directly and get a real answer, rather than a self-service case where the package is the only information you get. A person who cuts and wraps meat daily generally can't fake freshness the way a label can be swapped. Texture is a second useful check alongside smell and color. Fresh meat should feel firm and spring back slightly when pressed. Meat that feels slimy, tacky, or leaves a film on your fingers has already started breaking down, regardless of what any date or label claims. Texture doesn't lie the way packaging sometimes does. And here's the one that actually matters more than any single store type, because it's the pattern underneath every item on this list: traceability. Can you find out, with a real answer and not a shrug, where this meat came from, how it was handled, and how long it's been since it left the processor? A grocery store butcher counter, a real farmer's market vendor, a reputable online shipper, a well-run local butcher shop. Every genuinely good source on this list shares one thing. Someone can answer that question. The bad version of every category, gas station or online seller or roadside stand alike, is defined by nobody being able to. This is also the most practical filter you can actually use in real time. Standing in a store, ask, "Where's this from? When did it come in?" A place with nothing to hide answers easily and often enthusiastically. A place that gets vague, annoyed, or can't answer at all is telling you something, regardless of how nice the display case looks. Every other red flag on this list, bad temperature, damaged packaging, questionable dates, cross-contamination, tends to cluster wherever traceability is already missing, because the same carelessness that hides where meat came from usually hides how it was actually handled too. Ask the question, and most of the other 9 answer themselves. Even without asking anyone out loud, the label itself usually has more traceability information than people bother reading. A specific farm or processor name, a country of origin label, a lot or batch number. A package with only a generic store brand and nothing else identifiable is telling you less than one that's willing to name exactly where it came from. So there you have it. 10 places and situations where the odds of a bad meat buy go up, and the one thread running through nearly all of them. You can always tell more than you'd think just by looking, asking, and trusting your nose over the label. None of this means treat every gas station or every clearance sticker like a crime scene. Most meat from most sources is completely fine because most people handling are doing their job properly. This is about knowing the handful of specific signs that something's actually gone wrong, so you can shop with real confidence instead of either blind trust or constant anxiety. And remember, good sourcing is only half the safety equation. Proper storage and cooking temperature at home matter just as much as where you bought it, which is honestly a whole video of its own. If this helped you shop a little smarter, hit subscribe. New pantry and grocery smart videos almost every day. Real numbers, no fear-mongering. And tell me in the comments, has a bad meat buy ever taught you one of these the hard way? Stay safe, stay smart,